And what that looks like, I suppose, in terms of on the ground is students leading ensembles, students reflecting on their own musical interests, students understanding where the music came from and why that music is there in this reality, their reality now, and what that means socially and critically, I suppose. We have students doing lots of songwriting for peers. We have lots of peer feedback. But I suppose, the ultimate way we drive student voice forward is through student choices within the lessons.
Welcome to Pass the Baton, empowering students in music education. Here, we amplify the voices of music teachers around the world who are passing the baton and creating environments where the music students are empowered. Together, we can help students transform from passive consumers to vibrant creators. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. I'm Kathryn Finch.
And I'm Theresa Hoover. We're glad to be coming back to you again today. So, Kathryn, one of the things I'm excited about with this season is we've been able to find guests who have such different backgrounds and just a lot of really different things to offer. And that's kind of how I felt about our guest today, Chris. Coming from the UK, where they have a very different music system than we do here in the US. I just thought it was fascinating to hear his perspectives on really music education and specifically student voice.
Yeah. Yeah. It is really interesting that, that's the fun of this work, I think, is just that there is no one way to do it. And even if you figured out one way to do it, the next year, it's not going to be the same way, right?
Exactly.
Every child, it is different. And so it's just really interesting, though, to hear from different perspectives and how people go about it and what they think about it and their research about it,
Yeah, again, as somebody who's working on research as well right now, I find that stuff fascinating too. And I thought it was interesting that, Chris was able to share the research that he's read and then also some of the things that he's tried in his classroom. Like, I tried it this way and then I tried it this way and this is what I found. Like, that stuff is key. And now, like you said, it's also particular to that one group of students. It might be different with a different group of students, but it's such valuable information. And I feel like everyone that we talk to, any kind of situation that they're in, whatever their school system, whatever their teaching looks like, I'm able to pull something in that I'm going to bring into my own teaching.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it really does come down to listen to your students, know your students, listen to them and try to understand each and every one of them. Right. Yeah. And how they're going to come at things so differently than you do and somebody else does. And again, that's kind of the joy of teaching. It's some days I'm so frustrated with it. And other days I'm like, it's so rewarding because you actually make that connection with someone.
Absolutely. Before we get to today's interview, if you're ready to make powerful shifts towards student-centered teaching, explore the Pass the Baton Coffee Club. Members get an exclusive deeper dive audio extra and a Reflect and Act PDF download after every episode, plus access to our full resource library.
For more personal support, our premium tier offers direct access to Kathryn and Theresa in a private Voxer group. Visit buymeacoffee.com/passthebaton to learn more and join.
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We are so excited to have our guest today, Chris Ricketts. Chris, welcome. It's so good to have you.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I know, we've got quite a time zone difference here, but we appreciate you making this work.
Yeah, so maybe could we start with that? Introduce yourself a little, tell us maybe where you are and your background and what you do in music education.
Yeah, I'm from Portsmouth in the UK. I am a music teacher first and foremost, but I am also the trust music coordinator, as we call them, for 9 schools across the south coast of England, called the Bohunt Education Trust. It's where I lead on curriculum development across a group of secondary schools, which is 11 to 16-year-olds. I'm also, alongside this, a doctoral researcher where I'm exploring curriculum, policy, and mostly student voice in music education. And my work sort of sits in between that practitioner and researcher sort of things. I'm particularly interested in how we can sort of look at power structures within our current systems within the UK and globally, and build mostly an inclusive, co-constructed curriculum that reflects the identities and the the lives that our students live musically every day. Everyone accesses music all the time, and I think that needs to be reflected in what we teach and how we teach it. So.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So, what kind of music classes do you teach right now?
So I've 11 to 16. So we have a key stage 3 and a key stage 4. Key stage 3 is mostly sort of 11 to 14, 11 to 13, 14, where music is compulsory. And they have to be in a class. They're in a class of 30 students, and we teach them sort of the music skills that they would need if they were not to carry it on, is sort of the hope. And then at the end of the key stage 3, they would choose whether to continue music on, where we would pick an exam board that's local and relevant to our students, which is a struggle at times. So it's a set exam board that we choose, and then we teach them through this course, which would usually incorporate performance, composition, and some sort of listening aspects to them.
That's it's always so interesting to hear because it is so different than the system that we have here in the States. But yeah, that's
Yeah, I
awesome.
think one of our biggest challenges in the UK we have is that we don't, because music becomes a choice after it being compulsory. We're currently in a sort of bit of a national crisis, I call it, with only sort of about 5% of a cohort taking up music within our secondary schools nationally. We're in a strong position at Bohunt. We're getting sort of double or triple that in most of our schools, which we're really proud of, and we which means hopefully we're doing something right. But I always strive and want to have more, because
Yeah.
if
Well,
it's up
yeah.
to me, we'd always have more students studying music more of the time.
Well, absolutely. I think that's what we all want is we want to be able to provide some kind of musical experience that's going to be meaningful to those students. But, as you said, figuring out what that is always the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got connected to you again through a mutual friend after you were here in the U.S. presenting for the Association for Popular Music Education conference, and I had a chance before this interview to read some of your blog, and I was reading some of the things that you were reflecting on from that conference, and there was one thing that really struck me, and I'm going to read it and then kind of ask you to elaborate a little bit. You said, one of the most striking realizations was just how new the concept of student voice and student led ensembles still feels within the US context. Across the sessions, there was a palpable sense of educators grappling with how to shift power dynamics in the classroom and truly center students in their own learning. This echoes the work we've been doing at Bohunt for years, amplifying student voice not just as a tool for engagement, but as a catalyst for authentic and transformative music education. That just gives me goosebumps when I read it.
Yeah.
So I guess would you be willing to kind of expand on that? We know that here in the U.S. we're working towards having more student voice. What does this look like for you? What does it mean? Tell us everything.
Yeah, I think it's important to know here that my experience in Memphis was very much a snapshot of sort of the work that's happening with the student voice, and it was amazing to sort of see and meet the like-minded people there and presenters around sort of how we're developing student voice and choice, especially sort of around the music wheel stuff and the student-led conferences that happen around the different states, which I really love. But it felt like it was a small conference. It felt like I only got like a small snapshot of those people that are really innovative in these ideas at the moment, and it maybe didn't feel necessarily as widespread as it feels for us in terms of I mean, I'm in a very privileged position that I can drive these pedagogies and these views across the 9 schools that I have, which is around about
Yes.
13,000 students at the moment,
Wow.
that will have to access music. And so, yeah, it really stood out to me how many educators were still grappling with how to do
Hmm.
student voice, how to do it,
Yeah.
make it meaningful and authentic, rather than tokenistic and sort of almost governed in a
Mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
So within our trust, we've been embedding student voice sort of structurally and culturally, and what that looks like is we're designing students' schemes of work alongside student interests and using sort of self-determination theory, which is our mutual friend Stephen Cox has obviously spoken about a lot, and this
Yeah.
is why we've gone so well because of our sort of values
Hmm.
that align. And what that looks like, I suppose, in terms of on the ground, is students leading ensembles, students reflecting on their own musical interests, students understanding where the music came from, and why that music is there in this reality and their reality now, and what that means socially and critically, I suppose. We have students doing lots of songwriting for peers. We have lots of peer feedback. But I suppose, the ultimate way we drive student voice forward is through student choices within the lessons. And when that can be through project work, a choice of projects that have musical creativity embedded within them, or through sort of curated performances where students have chosen that repertoire. And challenges of the musical canon, I think, is quite important. I think we look at why Western classical music is so dominant currently within musical structures in the UK, and we sort of try and question that and say and understand that as students. Hopefully, that's probably more our older students, but we still want to try and embed that critical understanding with students that are a bit younger as well.
Yeah. So yes. Well, I guess I'll go back to your comment about only seeing a snapshot. And yes, that is very fair to say. But I think that it's true that a lot of us here in the US are still kind of trying to figure out, like, okay, just how can this work? Because as I'm sure you experience too, there's a lot of traditions surrounding music education in our country, and there's a lot of, things that have been done certain ways. So but I think what's been so encouraging for Kathryn and I, especially with this podcast, is seeing how people are trying
Mhm.
something new and trying to incorporate student voice. And so, you know, we recognize that, and we love the idea that the Popular Music Education Conference sees
Mm.
so much of it. So I heard you talking about songwriting and peer feedback and choice and repertoire and things like that. So in a music class, when students are working on songwriting, what might that look like?
Um, Yeah, so first of all, we need to sort of understand the basics of songwriting and what that looks like in
Hmm.
terms of structure and form. I think that's sort of where we start with
Yeah.
songwriting. When we analyze which structures and forms have been used within all styles of music throughout the years, and in particular popular music, so we go down that route and sort of see, right, if we are writing a song, we want it to be relevant socially and culturally now. And the verse, chorus, verse, bridge, chorus, verse, pre-chorus, chorus structures need to be the way that students want to go down that route. And it's I want to say it's slightly guided by me, but it's guided through the students' interests of music. So they choose the music, we sit and analyze it together. I did a study a few years ago where I chose the repertoire, and I asked the questions: what structure does this music have? What structure is it? Can you name any of the elements that are happening throughout? And I got a sort of a wave of I don't knows, not sure, not no idea from the students, and this was the responses I got, and it was a Google form at the time, and I then posed them the exact same questions, but I allowed the students to choose the music that they were responding to, and I got far more in-depth responses on exactly what it is they were listening to because they were invested in it, I suppose, or they could link it to their lived experiences outside of the music classroom. And I think so often within music classrooms, we are choosing repertoire based on the sort of cultural capital, the cultural, what we believe is the higher culture of music, when actually I think things are shifting socially, and actually we need to look at whose culture, whose music are we looking at, why are we looking at this music, and I mean, especially for adolescents, teenagers, music forms such a huge part of their life and their identity as a person. Why cannot we reflect that within curriculum? So
Mhm.
it's not about abandoning structure. It's not about abandoning the skill sets that we'd want to see in music. It's about sort of co-constructing it and inviting students to be participants within their learning, not just the sort of the vessels that are taking it on board, and that's and any opportunity I get to do that is what I try and do, and I'm finding it's having immeasurable impact in comparison to previous curriculum structures that we've used.
Yeah, and I guess that maybe leads me to, and you said you have done some research too, some research into student voice. So what what can you help us with what you found out, or how that would help a teacher too?
Yeah, j- I mean, I suppose the research is around sort of teacher autonomy as well and
Mhm.
agency, and I that was where I originally went. How much opportunity do we get as teachers to teach what we want to teach? And I went down that route to start with, and I thought, actually, hold on. Our music curriculum, our national curriculum is 6 bullet points long. So the autonomy for teachers is very much there. They can take these 6 bullet points, and there are limitations within our Ofsted guideworks and frameworks that we have to adhere to, or would like to be seen to be adhered to if we're inspected. Ofsted is a governing body that come in and inspect schools, and give them a sort of a grade, I suppose, in a way, as to how well they're doing. And I suppose they can shift and change the goalposts of what they want to see within music education at times. And we're going through a reform at the moment with our current government. So it's exciting times and it's changing. But what that means, I suppose, on the grand scale of things, is those 6 bullet points within reason give us a lot of leeway as teachers. But I've sort of reflected and thought actually it gives us a lot of leeway in terms of how we can make our curriculum engaging. I said at the start, we're losing 95% across the nation, going into key stage, going into 15, 16-year-olds to studying music. What is going wrong was the question I was asked. Why is this not working? And I thought it's to do with the cultures, the genres, the skills that we are giving value within our music curriculum, and what needs to shift to make that more engaging for our students, for them to feel successful. Because I think a lot of our students don't feel successful when they play music. It's hard, and I totally agree it is hard. But is it hard because we're asking the wrong things of our students to do? Is it hard because we're looking for the wrong skills in our students? Because we it's really interesting. We have students come from all different backgrounds from our schools, and they all have different musical experiences. Um, so we can't expect the same from somebody that's had lessons as a child from 3 years old to somebody that's going into their first lesson in secondary school of music, playing the same instrument. We cannot have those same expectations on our students. So it needs to be adaptive. And I think that's sort of where what the research found was we're all at different points within musical experience. We all have different skills that we value and different cultures that we value within music. And we all have different musical identities that need to be reflected in what we teach and how we engage the students.
It struck me that the first thing you talked about just then was teacher autonomy.
Mm.
So often here we talk about student autonomy, we talk about the student voice and the student, like all of that, but you're so right that it starts with the teacher. The teacher needs to feel like they have the autonomy to then do whatever it is with the curriculum to meet the needs of the students. And I think that's something that, Kathryn, we've seen a lot of people say, oh, well, I can't, I have to do this, or I have to.
Mhm.
But I think, and maybe does the research say this, do teachers have more autonomy than they perceive they do?
Teachers believe, well, I can only speak within our trust, but
Of course.
teachers within our trust believe that they have a lot of autonomy currently within the
Okay.
structures that we have, which is good. I mean,
Okay. That's good.
within our curriculum, we have a selection of I can statements
Mm.
for each term because we've got schools that are of wealthier backgrounds and schools of sort of with more poverty around the area.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to make the curriculum autonomous for the teacher to make their professional judgment, um, and give them a chance for agency as well, I suppose.
Yeah.
But within that, we are pushing now for the sort of student agency and autonomy within that. And so what we do is we give I can statements, for each sort of the topics, I suppose, or each of the terms that we are in, and then it's up to the teacher of how they get to those I can statements with those students, depending on context.
Yeah. I feel like that some of the teachers that we work with feel that they don't have quite the same autonomy, but yeah, I question if it's just a feeling or if it's, within truth. Because I think that, but that you're right, that's the key. The teacher needs to feel that they have some autonomy so that they can then,
Yeah, I still
adjust
think we,
things for
we've got
kids.
work to do within our trust to give more autonomy,
Hmm.
um, to teachers, because I don't think they do have autonomy, which is really interesting, at the
Oh, that's
moment.
very interesting.
Because I think within our current, and it doesn't come from our structures as a trust, it comes from the sort of the wider top-down heavy government structures that we have coming down to us. And I think that's where there are restrictions within autonomy, but it's not necessarily seen by every teacher. Or it's never going to change, so it doesn't matter. Is sort of the is also the sort of sometimes
Mm.
what we get.
Yeah, I could see that. I can see that. So you mentioned self-determination theory. What are some other things that you found in the research that kind of lead us towards these ideas?
Music, the values given to musical skills, I think, is a big thing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this was my master's um, dissertation was about sort of the perceptions around curriculum and how we need to have a curriculum reform. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I suppose I'm still battling with this one in terms of
Mm-hmm.
the research, in terms of making student voice and choice authentic,
Yeah.
and agentic rather than tokenistic and governed, which is sort of, and it's always difficult because I am the formal teacher in the room in a formal setting, and a lot of our musical sort of where we can give musical voice and choice to students is within the informal structures of the Lucy Greens and the Steve Hollies, who's written about the modern band. And so I think we're still navigating that. We're still working out what that looks like because I still think within that informal setting that there's musical metacognition or musical skills that need to be had as basics before you can give the student a truly democratic voice within their music
Mm.
education.
Yeah. Yeah. And you talked about making sure that the student voice and choice is authentic. I think
Mm.
it's very easy to give like that perception of choice. Well, you can choose this song or this song, right? And
Yeah,
yeah, sure, they're getting a choice, but does that really get down to
yeah.
the needs of the student?
I mean, there's a piece I've written at the moment where I gave choice to students, and they were just completely paralyzed by the idea of having this choice. And I tell you what did work and did help is give them a website that had a number of the Music Will website that had a number of
Mm,
repertoires in there for them to choose from and a number of genres, and it was excellent. And actually, sort of that giving them choice within this, like a restricted choice, I suppose it has to be on this website,
yeah,
but we know that the website gives quality resources to students that they can
right,
access.
right.
And it's a fine line because if you say just search up the chords on Google for this song and there's so many threats within that, and
Yes.
giving such an open choice paralyzes some students.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But then again, there's the threat of if they're in groups and working in groups, whose voice is being heard. And one thing I did find in the research is usually the voice that's being listened to or being heard is the one with the probably the most musical perceived skill.
Mm,
And those with musical ability tend to be the louder voices in the room. And so, how can you mitigate and how can you sort that? And actually, sometimes it's a good thing because they can drive and lead the learning. But sometimes it's obviously detrimental to some of the other people in their group because their voice is not being heard, which then eradicates the authenticity that we're trying to find.
mm.
Mm.
It gives, yeah, it's always a lot to think about because and then what's kind of fun with this work is it's also, it feels like it's never done in that, like we always have room for growth. And I like that. I like that a
Absolutely.
lot.
And yeah, with that, you'll have a different set of students next year. What will
Mhm.
happen with some students will,
Right.
yeah, I mean, a lot of mine are going back to the sort of 90s rock bands and the reformation of Oasis coming through, is seeing an influence in their repertoire choices, which I find is
Yeah.
fascinating. But that's also a good discussion to have with the students. Why have you chosen this song? Is it because you've seen it and heard it? It's because your parents like it? What like? And that's also again sort of trying to promote that critical thought around why and what is
Yeah.
influencing their musical identity.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's good for you to share, your process of going through that as well. Like, okay, I've chosen this piece for us to work on, and this is what I was thinking about when I did it. So that
Yeah.
we're helping them kind of build that, okay, these are some of the things that we might think about. So that when it's their turn to talk through it. So I think that's also like a step teachers can take is just by, thinking out loud the things that they do to help model for the students.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what does a co-constructed curriculum look like in like how does that work in your classes?
Yeah, again, it's something I'm navigating, something I'm finding out, something I'm trying to build a framework for, which is incredibly difficult because again, the voice is being heard, and the sort of the depth of the voice and the musical skill that's needed to be truly democratic with your musical choices is really difficult to have as just sort of like a this is how it works, this is what's going on. So it's yeah, it's intertwining with everything musically, I think, and but it's having a reflective look on that and understanding the students in your room. So understanding and co-construction is never going to suit everyone in that room, especially if I've got 25 students in there with all different musical tastes. So co-construction is hard, but what we can do is try and personalize the learning in ways so that student does feel like their voice is being heard, or their voice is being heard because they're allowing those choices and doing that. So co-construction for me with students is where they can have choice, where it's not limited or restricted by current structures of exam boards, where they can have that choice. I will give them that choice of things that they want to do and things that they want to learn. And I will allow them to challenge the structures of the exam boards, and I'll allow them to write that in their essays as well at times. And because I think it's important, because that shows that critical understanding and talk it through with them, because sometimes there are frustrations for me as a teacher and for them as students of what we have to be covering and what we have to be doing. But as long as we're open and honest about it, we can understand why then that we are doing what we're doing in terms of the bigger picture. So co-construction is not there's no easy answer to this. It's
Right.
just being in dialogue with students and understanding their needs and being adaptive to them and having an iterative approach, I suppose, to the way we assess our students, especially in those earlier years as well.
Yeah. I think Teresa and I have talked sometimes about in the sense of when you seek their feedback and then you realize like there's just this hole in the learning that happens, like, oh, their thinking went here and I was going here, or whatever. And it's really interesting and good to know what they're thinking and have that dialogue back and forth, because you just
And
you don't.
yeah,
Yeah.
when I first started I would do almost like a democratic vote. Put your hand up if you want to do this one. Put your hand up if you want to do this one. And actually, what I realised then is if they're friends with a particular person, they
Oh,
might do it that way because they're with them. So how can I eradicate that sense of feeling where they feel they have to go a certain way because someone else is doing it? So I do anonymous sort of emails, anonymous votes, anonymous
Mm.
things with them in order to make sure that it is truly their voice I'm getting. But again, that still I can't eradicate any bias within some of those friendship groups or friendship structures. Friendship groups tend to want to work together as well.
Mhm.
And how often have I had students falling out within their bands in the first year that they've been put together, though they put themselves together in that band due to musical repertoire and due to musical interests, and it's really interesting. And at this point, I tend to take a step back and say, you've chosen to be in this group, you're there, you need to work it out together. And I think that's part of growing up as well. And
yeah.
actually, sometimes when being watched, that can be a messy process because they can be in the middle of this sort of dialogue phase where there's tensions within the band, and sometimes teenagers don't necessarily hold themselves to the sort of professionalism that we'd expect of ourselves when in conversations or in disagreement with someone. And so sometimes when being observed by other teachers, they see this and they think, oh my God, what's happening? And actually, what's happening is a process for our students. And I take a step back and I allow them to go through that process. And I think
Mm.
this is one of the most important lessons they learn because I'm not going to intervene and I'm not going to, I'm saying you've chosen to be this group, you're working it, work it out. How's it going to work? And actually, what the outcomes of that is 2 years later, they're in the same band. They have a 30-minute set list. They're 15 years old and they're playing venues and playing gigs. And that's come from them being able to navigate and negotiate each other's musical identities within their group. And I think that is a part of the process as well.
Yeah.
How to rehearse, how to be diplomatic, um, and how to work as a team.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of being a musician, it's part of life, it's part of everything. And the fact that you're letting them kind of take the lead on that's what we need to do.
Mm.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're not sitting there and saying, "Okay, here's your rehearsal structure. You figure this out," right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we do set some sort. Well, we talk about it.
Of
What should a
course.
rehearsal look like? What are the benefits of having somebody take the lead on a rehearsal? And you can guide it just for their. It's never a free for all. That's one thing student
Yeah.
voice is never a free for all. It has to be within sort of high autonomy but high structure in some
Mhm.
sense, in terms of expectations and in terms of what we expect for them to be achieving as teachers. And I think that's where our role shifts a little bit as music educator to um, expectations facilitator and enforcer in a way. It's a
Yeah.
horrible word, enforcer, but in terms of making sure that they're there and they are meeting those expectations is massively important because it's going to allow them to be more productive in the long run.
Right. Right. It's that gradual release of control, or and control is not the best word, but yeah, that gradual release of responsibility or whatever it is that we're
Yeah.
helping we're helping them build those skills, because that's something we also see, like, if you think about kind of mistakes or missteps, people will just say, okay, just go do it,
Mm.
go do this, go, I don't know, go find music, go, go practice. And the students are like, but
Yeah.
I don't know what to do, right? They don't know how to, what those steps are. So we have to kind of build that in. We have to scaffold it so that we can
Mm.
help them get there.
And the biggest hurdle for students is how to rehearse.
Oh,
I
for
find
sure.
how to rehearse in their own groups
Mhm.
without being in front of a conductor or without being in front of somebody that's telling them exactly what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that's one thing that's missing from our curriculum or missing from our Key Stage 4 curriculum within the exam boards is the the ability to be able to rehearse as a group and to show that effectively. And that's
Mhm.
something that probably I will go down the route of exploring a bit further in future research.
Yeah, I find that a lot. So for us in the US, there are a lot of ensemble based courses, right? Band, chorus, orchestra. Those are kind of the most common things you'll see in a secondary school. But it's very much, you follow the conductor, you do all those things. You are just a member of the ensemble. And I try to encourage teachers to think more about how, even in that ensemble structure, you can start to have some student voice. We can start to get the students making those musical decisions, doing those things on their own, so that when the students are off, jamming with their friends or playing by themselves, they know what to do, that they can figure out how to make music without us.
Yeah, I think one of my reflections coming away from Memphis, one of my biggest reflections was we've got to be really careful now going from those old structures that you have with marching bands, with orchestras, and with
Yes.
choir, and applying those pedagogies, the teacher-led pedagogies, to a modern band
Yes.
is something that is a big threat, I think, to that because you could end up with rock bands being conducted.
Absolutely. And
And I think
sadly, I
that's
think it happens sometimes.
yeah, and that to me is
Yeah.
that draws away from the informality or the real musicality of it because
Yeah.
it's not the way that it should be learned, or it's not the way it should be done. It should be
Right.
raw and it should be rough and ready, but it should be acknowledged as valued skill and
Absolutely.
valued culture. So
Yeah. That's one of the things that I really appreciate about the Association for Popular Music, that they do, at least in my what I've experienced, they do emphasize that this is not the same kind of music making as you're going to get in a traditional band or chorus or orchestra. And that's a really important clarification.
it's hard for teachers to give up that power
Yeah.
sometimes as well, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, because that's how we were taught, right? That's what we went to school doing. That's what we experienced. That's what we loved for many of us. So it's hard to make that shift. So kind of speaking of that idea in itself, we we've found a lot of the people that we talk to, maybe started their career doing things one way and then maybe started making some shifts and doing things differently. I know for me that was definitely the case. So how would you answer? I used to think this, but now I think this, or I used to do this, but now I do. Is there anything that would fit that for you?
That's a really good question. A really difficult question. I come from a similar sort of background of music education when I was at school, of it being drilled down me. So I suppose in a way, I used to think the best way to prepare students for music qualifications was to drill content and repertoire aligned to the specific specifications. Now, I think that the best way for them to prepare for these qualifications. Oh, I also used to think that because it's in this exam board here, it must reflect our curriculum in the younger years as well.
Mm,
And actually, that shift is that no, it doesn't need to anymore because we're losing 95% of our students. So what we need to do is have a shift of what we value down here in the lower years and attack that content that we have to cover in Key Stage 4 when they get there and they've chosen to be there. And so now I think the best way to prepare students for qualifications and for life, not just qualifications, is to create experiences that are meaningful and connected to who they are in terms of performance opportunities, sharing of creativity, and talking and critiquing music. So
Yeah.
I believe when students are invested, they can see themselves in what we're teaching when they've had um, when they can see themselves in the learning, they invest themselves more as well. So I think they write better compositions, they perform with more authenticity, and they certainly reflect more deeply. So I suppose the exams is the outcome, but not the driver.
Mm. Yeah, that's important.
Yeah. So in our book, Pass the Baton, we have a section that's try things tomorrow. Just to kind of help people, you think of that those larger things, larger changes, but then actually making it actionable and what could I try tomorrow? So, our listeners who are getting excited about this conversation, what would be something that you'd say they could try tomorrow?
Yeah, I'd say let them choose, let them argue, and let them rehearse. Um, so I suppose it's sort of hand over. I'm going from a performance aspect here. You could go down a
Mhm.
competition or a critiquing music from, but I'm going to performance because that's what I love, and so that's sort of me in the curriculum performing. So um, I would say try letting students choose their groups and repertoire, but that can be within structures. You can use the music world thing to help with that, or even our musical futures repertoire that we have on our with lots of play along videos is all good. So I'd say let them choose the groups and the repertoire, let them argue, and show them how to rehearse.
Yeah.
And so that would be the things I'd say try tomorrow because I think for me that's where the learning happens in my room. The learning of music and skill happens mostly with students when they're at their home and they're rehearsing and they're playing because they love doing that. But what happens when they come together in my classroom is they learn how to rehearse and they learn how to be human to each other and they learn how to engage with their musical worlds and the musical worlds of those around them. And I think that is what is special about music education and teaching.
Yeah, I like that. Because we want them to be making music outside the classroom. We want to be encouraging that. That's for me, that's one of the big goals. Yeah. Awesome.
Sometimes it's impossible for me for those older year groups to have students doing individual rehearsals with 30 in a class. And so they
Mm.
have to do the musical learning outside of repertoire, outside of that class to then bring it together in the class.
Yeah,
And that forms a lot of what they tend to do naturally and they tend to be more inclined to do it if they've chosen what they're doing. So,
exactly. Exactly. That's how we get them to do it. They need to be invested in it.
mm.
Just because the teacher said so isn't enough of a driving force anymore.
For some it is, for some it is, and some will. I've got students that will quite happily sit there and do as they're told for the whole time as well. And but that again, I think is an important thing to draw out of them is actually you don't have to be a vessel. You don't have to sit there and embrace and take in everything that we tell you. I want you to challenge it. I want you to challenge what I'm saying, because that's when the good critical conversations come about, and when again the deeper understanding and deeper learning is um what's the word? Is sort of, I suppose, oh no, the word's gone.
That's okay.
That's
The
fair.
deeper understanding and deeper learning is then negotiated and it's where I don't know, I've forgotten. Can you ask the question
But I
again?
mean, yeah, no, I guess, but I'm wondering what you're thinking is like, and I'm struggling with it too, but just I can be just to be a more active participant in the learning, like have that critical thinking for yourself. What do you think? And it matters what I think, so I don't know if that's kind of what you're trying to say either. I'm not saying it
Yeah,
well.
yeah, it allows them to question more and
Mhm.
yeah, give a deeper understanding, I suppose, is where
Yeah.
I'm going to
Yeah.
go with it. It's,
And
Yeah.
and again, we need that in music and we need that in life.
mm,
So we're teaching them so many important things. And it's a matter of getting the students to realize that they're, let's see if I can figure out how to say this. Their role is not just to learn the things that we teach them, but to
Right.
be that open learner and
Yeah.
and to be open to all the things. So anyways, we're all saying the same things. But this has been really fun. It's been great to hear your perspectives and kind of hear what things look like, in your classrooms for your students. And it's awesome. If someone wanted to connect with you and learn a little bit more about your work, how can they do that?
My students regularly call me old, because I'm on Facebook, and so Facebook is probably the best way to connect with me. Or my email, which can I share that with you, and then we'll
Yep,
put that
absolutely.
on their email. And and honestly, I would love to hear any thoughts, because like some of the things we talk about are controversial here. Some of the things
Yeah.
people don't like them, and I like to hear that. I like to hear the other perspectives as well, because I love to have those conversations. So.
Yeah, us too. Us too. Awesome. We'll make sure we put the links in the show notes so people can get a hold of you. Thank
Great.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This has been such a great conversation. Like I said, we loved it, and we appreciate that you making the time, especially at such a busy time for your school year. So it's very
Thank you. I've
appreciated.
had the best time. I could talk all day about music
yeah.
education. And
Oh
so
yeah.
thank you. It's just been so refreshing and so lovely to be able to talk about it, and to be able to do it so nicely on a evening for me on a Saturday. So thank you. It's been a
Yeah.
real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. If you have found value in our conversation, please hit that like button, subscribe to our podcast, and leave a review. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us grow our community of passionate music educators.